Yeah, well, I'm the director. Thank you all for coming. I directed this film that's been co-produced with a group of people who are independent journalists or running independent media organizations in Greece. And it was, as you saw, it's a case that happened in 2012, spring 2012, so it's been a very short time of shooting and getting ready to release this because the case is still pending, and it's a very recent case, and we just wanted to make the film as soon as possible, and potentially we're going to be trying to direct donations to the women's legal case who really need it at this moment. I don't want to say anything particular at this time, but I'll answer questions or.
Hi everyone, I'm Toni, and I'm from the Sex Worker Open University Collective, which the branch that I belong to is based in London. We have branches in Glasgow and one opening in Leeds, and basically we're an organisation founded by sex workers and allies, people working in the sex industry in all areas, be it indoor work, street work, working in parlours or brothels, working in porn, erotic masseurs, strip clubs, peep shows, etc. We organise events such as exhibitions, skill-sharing workshops. We hosted quite a big conference in Scotland earlier in the year, and we're basically open for any sex workers or allies to join and help us campaign for decriminalisation and also just as a social thing. So, yeah, that's me.
Hi, I'm Hector, as Michael said. I'm also co-director of Queer Kings, that's all. In terms of why I'm here, other than that, which is the formal sort of part, and the happenstance that I'm also Greek, so this concerns me in a kind of different way. I don't really know that this. I mean, as we found out through the film, if you come to this just with this, the knowledge that this is a film about the prosecution of HIV-positive so-called prostitutes, sex workers in Athens a year ago, and what happens with that, you might sort of think that this is, this is something that both Toni and myself and would be sort of. Would have something to say about, but it seems to me that the film itself sort of proves that it goes well beyond our specific areas, if you like, of thinking or expecting or activism, and that's what struck me the most about the film. And in a sense, I wanted to, I mean. It's a Q&A session, but I wanted to sort of start, if you like, by asking Zoe about, first of all, the intention in, because you mentioned something about showing it and maybe able to sort of raising money, etc. So what the intention behind doing the film and the exposure that the film has had so far?
Sure, thank you. Well, first of all, when you make a film, you want to make a film for the purpose of telling a story to an audience. Well, it's very strange, and these are terrible times for Greece in many ways. And I thought that this case, was really important because it's a case that just the timing of what happened, and I will explain more about that. What was happening at the time makes it to me a sort of a landmark case of kind of a turning point in the crisis in Greece. So at the time in Greece, rather let me just fast forward and then I'll go back in time. But a few days after this case happened, these arrests, we had the first round of national elections in Greece. And that was a complete shift in the whole political landscape in Greece. So imagine you have an election and suddenly the Tories drop by something like 15%, and the Labour Party drops by 30%. And then you have EDL being the third largest party in the country. So that's what happened a few days after this. We had the two largest parties that have monopolized the political government in Greece for more than 35 years. Be completely, drop in percentage. And then we had a neo-Nazi party called the Golden Dawn become the third largest party in Greece. So you saw a few days after this, it was the tipping point, if you like, of a political crisis in Greece. And also what happened was that with these sweep operations, we had the launch of major police operations that started right there. So we had 3 months later, we had a major police operation called Xenios Dias, named after the god of the gods in Olympian mythology, in Greek mythology. So it was a police operation basically called hospitality operation that targeted undocumented migrants, where hundreds of thousands of people have been rounded up and victims of racial profiling basically in central Athens. They stopped counting at, I think, about 85,000 the first 7 months. And we also had more police operations targeting specifically drug users in March of 2013. So it's important in that it signaled sort of a more aggressive policing and organized policing in central Athens and around Greece. But also, it's the culmination of very dangerous, racist, just blatantly racist and what was the word you? Xenophobic. But not only that, as a fascist discourse in Greece that wasn't coming from the Golden Dawn, but had been carefully sort of, it had escalated from people that belonged to the center of the political spectrum, so center-right and the Socialist Party politicians. So and thirdly, and I will put a full stop after this. It signaled to me that the crisis, which had up until that point been just had taken a physical form in various ways. So we were seeing the signs of decline in central Athens, in the shops, and the broken marble staircase in front of the Greek Parliament, which had become sort of like a symbolic sign of the anarchist violence, etc. Or the streets that were not being cleaned regularly because of cuts in the budget and the municipal budget, etc. So we were seeing these signs. But we had also, as people who had protested, a lot of us, and were already starting to feel the effects of unemployment, we're beginning to feel this in our own bodies, from the tear gas, from our presence in the city where we were confronted with very excessive police violence. And I thought that this was kind of a moment when the powers that be basically said, look, this is not just going to be, pies and charts and losing your job, etc. You are going to have, your body is going to be in crisis. So you are going to be targeted physically by us, and there's nothing that we're not prepared to do. I mean, watch us go after these people now, because we can do anything. So I felt, in a sense, personally targeted in some way, or I felt that we were all going to be. I identified with these women in some way, and it was just the timing of it was perfect. It was. The way that it was badly done, the whole operation, but in terms of the timing of it, it just came at a moment where it just made complete sense to me what this crisis was, beyond a financial, political, or even health crisis.
Perhaps we can
Shorter
open
next time I answer a question.
We can open to the floor. Any questions? Yeah, in the back. I'll be right up.
Hello. First of all, thanks for organizing this night and for making this film. Okay, well, it's very emotional for us who've been involved in the solidarity movement the past 1.5 years to see this again and re-experience these sorts of feelings you've just described, this kind of very material fear that, you know, the level of state kind of violence and the absurdity of it is like beyond every discourse you might produce. Okay, so it's a very complex discussion, of course, because it's a very kind of central point in this like right-wing turn in Greece. My contribution to this discussion, maybe a question, is regarding the solidarity discourses that were produced after this happened, because there was a very quick response from the left and from the anarchist scenes, where there are like at least 12 collectives produced like posters supporting these women. And in my opinion, now that there is some like time has passed, in this response, one could say that there was quite obvious that there is a lack on the field of on how we understand how we politicize sex working as such. A lot of them, for example, were like saying that these women, these customers, like these clients, should be punished, or if they contracted HIV, this is their punishment, you know, using all these like very problematic metaphors of what sex working is, and taking away the agency of these women and speaking on behalf of them. For example, there was this very iconic poster that was like one of the pictures that was published in the newspaper, and then it was like, us, sex workers, we will kill you all, or something like that. And I was like interested to start this conversation on what is a solidarity movement. For example, there is this aspect that, you know, raising awareness and raising money, which is really important. And then there is this other thing that you intervene into the social, like the public discourse, and you try to make some kind of statement. And on that side, one could say that there were lots of problematics surrounding, yeah, basically sex working. Of course, most of the women, they said that they were not sex workers, and that's very important to keep it in mind. So that was my...
Okay, if I can say something. I don't remember this particular poster. First of all, the solidarity that you referred to involved supporting the women in prison, which the imprisonment, the detention before trial went on for, in the last group of 5 women that remained in prison was about 10 months. So it's a very long time and in terrible conditions. And so there was solidarity to the case itself. Regarding the sex work part, first of all, only one woman, as was said in the documentary, was arrested in a legal brothel. I leave it to you to speculate on how it's possible to find one woman who has HIV in one illegal brothel without, you know, a wider operation. So it seemed to me to have been a very targeted move on behalf of the police and the doctors from the Center of Disease Control that have in their database, in their archives, the name and date of every single HIV-positive person in Greece. You can imagine how scary that was. The woman was not, it was not investigated how she had ended up being there. So 22 years old from Russia. Okay? And then all the other women, without exception, were caught in central parts of Athens, not engaging in any sort of transactional anything with anyone. Which means that in the case file, a police officer who's named in a lawsuit here was testified that he had rounded up 96 women, this was in the first major sweep, from different parts of Athens, where it would have been physically impossible for a person to be present there at all these different you know, streets in such a short span of time. And he said that they were moving provocatively. And that's how he, you know, assumed that they were sex workers. So there was no evidence, and this is important when you make a documentary. I mean, you have to talk about what the facts are. So the facts are that they were not engaging in illegal prostitution. In Greece, prostitution is a legal activity if you test for HIV regularly, etc. But because of the brothels can be legal if they meet certain criteria, like being this far from a school and that far from a church, etc. But because of how congested Athens is and densely populated, it's impossible to meet the criteria. So, there's a lot of issues that you're bringing up, but I just want to say briefly before I give the microphone to somebody else, that in this case, the idea of agency and choice of the women was used, manipulated by the authorities and the media to support the intent to transmit the virus, and that's extremely dangerous. I mean, it's an extremely dangerous tactic. Okay, and it's dangerous for public health in terms of public health and what that says about the dangers of contracting HIV, how we should communicate in our consensual relationships, who is in danger of getting the virus, which is basically everybody. So that's the part that is important here. The idea of agency and choice being used in order to promote lies and advance a prosecution that's not based on any evidence.
And I would also say that it's interesting, even in a legalized context in Greece, that these women, it's almost the opposite problem that we have in other parts of the world where the victim narrative is really strong and sex workers are made to have almost no agency at all. That in this context in Greece, the women who may have not been sex workers at all were portrayed not only to have been sex workers, but to be actively trying to infect people, to be setting out with, they mentioned intent in the film, like having sex not for money or pleasure, but for intent, like a third purpose. And a poster campaign claiming that they're all out to kill you. I mean, I find it interesting that these women would be portrayed to be sex workers and sort of painted as a threat in this way. I think historically oppressed groups that have been treated this way are seen to be a threat, like sex workers pose in the eye of those who seek to incarcerate them like a threat to health, to marriage, to the family unit, just as homosexuality may be seen to be a threat to the family unit, it's interesting that the accusation of being a sex worker is something like weaponized against these women, even if that may not have been the case. It's an interesting one. Yeah. Any other questions? Or you?
Hector, do you have something to say?
What I wanted to say in that respect is for me, if you couple that, the idea that they were portrayed as sex workers, even though, as the lawyer said, more than 80% of them were not. Only one of them was found out to be one. But and that was, I think that's coupled. That's part and parcel of the rhetoric about HIV being imported into Greece. So it's a foreign body. It's a foreign body that doesn't belong to the Greek society, and therefore has to be imported by those people who are either trafficked, but we don't care how they're trafficked, but or they're sort of deliberately, but with intent, sort of passing it around. And I think that what's really struck me is that when we heard the lawyer from Birkbeck talk about how how sort of the criminalization of HIV since the advent of tritherapies, etc., has grown in those parts of the world. Why? Because it is possible to do so. It is possible to stigmatize people, certain classes of the population, sort of parts of the population that are more easily relatable to HIV infection than the general population. Now, I think that what's interesting is how he said, the fear of the other that we have. Well, it became clear to me the second time I watched this film, not the first time, how the interview that you took of a lot of these women talked about their village, their town. So the picture to me in my mind became really clear. This is not, the health minister, I don't even want to name him really, blamed or put it on sort of sub-Saharan African migrants, which is exactly the kind of message that the Golden Dawn would like to pass on as well. But actually, it's not the other. Or if it is the other, it's the most Greek phenomenon, or the kind of a phenomenon that everybody in Greece or from Greece understands and knows, the kind of astiphilia we call it in Greece. I don't know how you say it. I'm not a geographer. Yeah, so sort of, the kind of the migration. Yeah, internal migration from villages and towns into capitals, and what that brings. So, the idea, what I'm saying is that it's striking how the enemy, the other...
Into a migrant, basically, because they can't return to... I'm sorry, I was thinking, I was just thinking that they are now turned into migrants in terms of not being able to go back to these villages because they've been stigmatized and can't go back to these small communities, or...
Yeah, and it's exactly, we pin it on the foreign body, but it's not. It's the foreign body is sort of, it's within us, and that's what made these realizations sort of struck me as that's quite important.
Thank you. Another question over there? I see lots of hands. So.
Hi, thank you very much. That was very intense, very interesting. My question is, what do you think is the agency of your film? In terms of you as a filmmaker, as an artist, as a journalist, I don't know how you feel about it, but what do you think making it was your intention, and how has it transformed since it was filmed, screened in so many other places outside and inside Greece? What do you think is the agency of it towards the narratives that it's talking about, and all of the social conversation that has been happening since then?
Well, we screened in Greece, all over Greece. It's surprising that in Greece we're not just invited by gender studies departments or queer studies departments, but even by small culture clubs and small towns, and because a lot of people lost their jobs in Athens have returned to their hometowns, and they're starting these book clubs and film clubs, etc. But also universities, the cinemas, and it's just from the premiere in Athens, we realized it was a big story and people hadn't forgotten it. I knew that people had been talking about it in social media for a very long time, and I kind of referring to it as something that it was kind of a low point that everybody remembered. It was one of the very low points, like the activist was saying, we can't sink any lower as a country, and that had stayed in people's consciousness. And I would say my intention, first of all, I got very angry. And I think what happens in Greece, certainly, and I don't know, to a certain extent, I think in the UK, with mainstream media, they sensationalize something, they just throw it at you for 2 days, 3 days, 2 weeks, and then they just forget about it and put it aside. But obviously that's when the story and the tragedy started. Like the mother said, that's when our tragedy started. And I think documentaries, and the documentary form, or depending on how you want to use it, offers itself for an alternative view into an event. It gives you the time to expand on something. We don't have to use TV technique or voiceovers, and you can just allow a narrative that's more free and not bound to the kinds of things that the TV news is about. It's very fragmented and choppy, kind of, so it tells what you think, okay, thank you, next, etc. And because I got lucky with the women giving me these interviews, and I had so much, I felt while making it that this was an opportunity to hear the voice of their voices, the voices in terms of not only what they had to say, but the actual voices. And that's when you see a big gap in terms of purely civilization, I guess, between the journalist and the girl. It's when you hear her talk and how she uses the language, how she's able to lose her cool and then just take a deep breath and keep talking, that you see the character of the person, as opposed to, you know, the people who make tons of money to talk all day long and basically lie and propagate these kinds of, you know, lies and agendas, etc. And I wanted a documentary that would allow people to experience, you know, that. Thank you. You're welcome.
Sorry, I wanted to ask you as a supplement to this, because it struck me as well that as a kind of the format of the documentary was that you did not interview, we didn't hear your voice, apart from the very beginning. There was no kind of intervention other than the bits where you had, you know, the mannequins, the very suggestive kind of images of the mannequins behind bars and with the kind of the painted dick on her mouth, on the mannequin's mouth, etc. Which is still so those are very suggestive images. But then the only time that we do hear your voice is when you talk about with that woman about her photography hobby, and it seemed to me that there's something there about. Or I wanted to ask you, what do you think? Why did you make that choice of sort of only hearing you about something that is in a sense self-reflexive? That you talk about her involvement in what you do, or in what you were doing.
I think it's more of a technical thing. I think I like when telling a story, you kind of have to set it up for people. Even you have to explain everything, but when the film starts, people need to know, okay, this is conversations and interviews. Somebody's on the other side behind the camera, and somebody is the speaker. So you kind of set it up, and then you let it flow without interrupting with your questions. But also, because if I had taken out my voice, it would have taken away from the immediacy of the confession, which I tried doing, and it didn't work for some reason. I don't know, but it's a good question. Yeah. And as far as the images, I don't know if... Well, let's take more questions, or I don't know, but there's a lot to say about the images.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I think you've already answered this a little bit by talking about voice, but I was really interested in what you said about this move by the Greek government being a kind of biopolitical one, that it's a signal that they're planning to operate kind of directly on the level of bodies. And I was thinking about how that could be seen to present a problem for documentary, which is often seen as very information-based and kind of rhetorical and presenting an argument. So I was wondering how you negotiated that, whether you felt like you had to kind of make your argument unfold on that same bodily level, or sort of what your thoughts were about kind of bringing together the documentary form in this particular kind of political oppression.
Well, when you have limitations, the limitation is also an opportunity to free yourself in other ways or find other means to tell a story. And certainly this story is very much a story about Athens, like I was saying a little bit earlier about the urban sort of decline and the signs of the crisis on not just the buildings and stores and store windows and statues, etc. So I felt the women's presence, if you like, in those neighborhoods, because I shot in neighborhoods where near the streets where they had been arrested, and more than once, almost every day that I shot there, I saw injecting drug users, openly injecting drugs in broad daylight in these parts of Athens. So some of them only a few blocks away from the parliament. So imagine somebody at Trafalgar Square or something doing that at 3 p.m. or something. So so I kind of went out there and I looked for them. So it sounds like a pretentious thing to say, but you look for images that you think would be stand-ins for the women, because obviously you can't show their bodies, and you can't really replicate the images of television. And you're looking also for a different aesthetic. There is something beautiful in decline too. There's something, I guess, transcendent perhaps, And there's a feeling that you're trying to capture. It's not about showing, just showing the misery, just Greek misery and display, and like the images of riots and burned buildings and all that kind of stuff. But I was trying to get a little bit closer, maybe. But definitely, I'm not an academic on these issues. I'd probably speak more eloquently about this, but it is a crisis of the body, and the body is at stake here. And we all know that no matter what, if we're going to change our society, we need to change ourselves, obviously, but we also need to. We're going to have to put our bodies in danger at one point or another, and that had become clear. In fact, before these arrests, there hadn't been protests in Greece for a while. There was anticipation of a change, and things have sort of quieted down a lot, and there was a deadly silence, if you like. And so that added to the shock of this operation to me, that people had played it safe, but it wasn't going to be allowed. It was a signal of you can't come back to the streets, because we own them now. Look at the police. Look at what we were doing here.
It's also related to what one of your interviewees says. I wish I could tell it like it is. Sort of to tell it like it is, but I can't. It's not because I won't, but I can't. And in a sense, what seemed to me to be sort of partly, at least, the case is that you did, for them, tell it like it is. Like the documentary does it, in a sense. I mean, the voiceless. What she complains about being voiceless, in a sense, is something that you can give voice to by the documentary, and not just you. As directing it, but the people who did speak. Like for example, we can blame, and we should blame the doctors of the Centre for Disease Control, absolutely. But the two women doctors that you interviewed, the woman from Syngros and the woman from Evangelismos hospitals, they were both really directly saying this is what happened, and not. They were not voiceless. There are issues of class there and issues of education, etc., but isn't it true to say that what your interviewee was complaining about, the woman that she wished she could tell it like it is, but she couldn't, you did for her?
Yeah, I think what she was talking about is I kind of felt the frustration that you're trying to say in one, sort of summarize what this is all about. That you can say, yeah, it's about the votes, it's about just there's the political the game, etc. that the doctor talked about, but there are some things that cannot be expressed, especially if you've been, forget about me, if you've actually have been targeted and did go through this. There are things that you're thinking about and that you want to say that you can't really express. There's always something left unsaid in a tragedy like this, in a personal tragedy, and it's also something that is not can never be said in a TV format. I mean, nobody ever says on television, I can't really express myself right now. You have to keep talking until somebody interrupts you. So again, I thought it was an interesting sort of counterpoint to all the babble and the meaningless talks and the talk and lies of television. It's a moment of pure honesty from a person who has been abused in this way, and that's why I kept this moment in there.
I see lots of hands.
Thanks very much for this. Going back to the biopolitical, I really liked how this film brings to the surface all this discussion about state production of disposable bodies and bodies to be protected, such as the poor, innocent family man's body who suddenly becomes the victim rather than the perpetrator. I mean, God, I mean, it's a family man who yet visits a prostitute, and suddenly the state has to protect them by rendering some other lives disposable and not thinking about protecting them or giving them the necessary medication. The film, I think, is very successful in problematizing this idea of the sacred family man. I would like to ask whether there was any public discourse, because from the media and those journalists and the authorities, it all seems like it's taken for granted that we should protect that family man. I would like to ask, has anyone said anything against the family man?
Well, the minister, who shall remain unnamed, said in an interview that he called them donkeys, which in Greece is a big insult or something like that. That's how he was trying to basically say that, I disagree with what these imaginary family men were doing. But of course, no talk of prosecution or any sort of real analysis or serious, thought into, so then why are you prosecuting the woman instead of the man, if this is an illegal activity? Because really the issue here was not engaging in illegal prostitution, or that's a minor charge. The issue was to make something big out of this, to justify the major sweep. Because when you're doing something like this, you're spending money for a police sweep. You can't possibly do it just to take people from the street that you're going to release a few days later, because you can't get the camera on that. But the whole idea of the family man, the other minister you saw talking about garbage, said that we need to protect the Greek family on his Facebook page. So there were several statements that were made in that vein, but I don't think there was. I don't think that there was a serious sort of challenge to all that. I don't think that anyone really defended, first of all, because the prosecution charge was taken for granted, that it was based on evidence. And secondly, because, again, I think what supports this, what makes this look solid from the outside, is the idea that a person who knowingly transmits the virus, who knows from the very beginning, the media said she knew that she had, the doctors told us that she knew that she had HIV. That is a very, a very powerful kind of a message there. That's very difficult to take it apart. And you can't even take it apart in criminalization cases in countries that don't have Greece's problems, like Canada, for example. There's a huge, in the United States, where there's a lot of prosecutions of HIV-positive people, especially women and minorities. And we have hundreds of people going to prison for aggravated sexual assault over non-disclosure or exposure to HIV. And it's very difficult to attack, that argument, or to take it apart and to talk about the idea of agency and intention and responsibility. Who has a responsibility for do you have responsibility for your own body, right? So if you do, then how can you prosecute people for not taking responsibility for your body? Okay, and under what conditions that can actually be justified. As far as the family man, I mean, perhaps, I don't know, Tanya, you wanted to talk a little bit to speak to that, but I think it's a very patriarchal society, Greece.
I think it's important when condemning what happened to these women, not to simply say, why wasn't it the clients who were, I mean, we now know that it wasn't actually about the clients. No one came forward to say that they'd been infected by these sex workers, because no one knows if they were. But if that had been the case, the answer is not to criminalize men who pay for sex. It flips it around into an entirely different system that we struggle with in other parts of Europe and the world, where the purchase of sex is criminalized and sex workers are still the ones that suffer. Just as you were saying, we cannot seek to put the blame on. I mean, if a client is criminalised, it flings sex workers into a buyer's market, whereby they find it that much more difficult to negotiate safer sex. It happens in Greece too, when you have illegal brothels and women are selling sex in an illegal context. They are going to be under pressure to offer services without a condom, and that is something that's been created by the illegal context of their work. So but it's really important not to. I mean, this whole family man idea is completely bogus. Yes, but I mean, no men did come forward. Again, it's easy to pin this problem on like the invisible client, the man who buys sex. But this was a problem like from higher up, and criminalising clients doesn't help women either, as we've seen in countries like Sweden, where that law has been in place for over 10 years, and HIV figures are not good there for that reason. Women are scared to carry condoms, they're scared to take time to negotiate safer sex practices on the street because they're worried their clients will be too jumpy and leave. So yeah, it's not a good route to go down. Just wanted to add that.
Another question, yeah. I'll go on this down here because I've been up top a lot.
Thank you. I was just really curious, because one of the doctors described, and as is the case in a lot of countries, a lot of HIV is actually mostly the case not in heterosexual relationships, whether paid or not, but in men who have sex with men, as is the case in Greece. And in many, many countries, that has been the focus of a lot of public campaigns, and actually men who have sex with men have had a lot of social trouble and have been smeared in public and political campaigns. Why has that not been the focus in Greece? Why has specifically the focus been on migrant women and on sex workers, apparently?
You mean from the authorities? Why is there no...
Yeah, why was the focus on these two groups and not on the group where, you know, that could also be an angle?
Yeah, I can only guess because they're better organized than migrant women who are being trafficked. Also, we had a spike in HIV infections starting when the first stats after the crisis hit came out, showed a huge spike in HIV infections among injecting drug users, statistically. So it was about 200 new infections that year in 2011. And then another about 200 to 300 the following year. So that's a big statistical rise, but it's still not, you know, obviously a generalized epidemic. I think that I don't know the answer to that. I really don't know why they didn't do it, but there are men who have sex with men as a target group would have been more difficult to demonize. It would have been more complicated because they have a voice. They organize themselves in organizations and activism, in NGOs, in unions, etc. And it would have been harder to target them. But what's interesting, and I'll say this very briefly, sex workers' unions did not become involved into this at all. And in fact, there were sex workers who appeared on television. And although television is not the place to know exactly to gauge the overall, you know, consent of any group in any way, but who did support the operation and spoke in favor of the police actually taking action against women who are taking our jobs out there, etc. So it's a very strange ecology. I mean, I'm not sure you can compare it to anything in the UK, but yeah, I'll pass it on.
I mean, obviously nobody knows the answer. You can only speculate. My speculation would be, of course, that, you know, gay men in Greece as elsewhere are much less vulnerable to that kind of state pressure, and sort of on the one hand, and on the other hand, given, and I think this film proves it beyond any doubt, given that the whole sort of purpose of this sweep etc., all of this movement is misinformation and the desire to create a scapegoat. And these women were the scapegoat for HIV. HIV becomes a scapegoat. I think there's a suggestion, just a suggestion, that that particular minister, whose name shall not be uttered, had started with, in June 2011, he gave that ridiculous speech at the UN. In November 2011, he gave this press conference about HIV. Like, it's almost like he's kind of bubbling under, and he has it in his mind to create something about HIV. I mean, it's a speculation, yeah? But then to do that with gay men would have been shooting himself in the foot, in the sense that if it is about men infecting men, well, they're a very small minority anyway. This is about, this can reach, this is, the bubble that can burst. This can reach via the family man, it can reach the family. Yeah? So it goes sort of, drug user, prostitute, family man, family. And that's the whole fabric of society being dismantled. Whereas gay men are sort of, between themselves, they can do whatever they like.
But also it's about place, I think. I mean, where do these men have sex with men? We have to go find them. If you name them as a target group, where would you go? Not that I have it, that it's, below them to do something like that. Eventually, we might see something like that. But it's much more difficult to organize a police operation against homosexuals than it would be against people who are gathering these specific parts where they know where they are, and it would signal it would be more generalized, open persecution.
I'm not, I mean, you have to know already that even before 2011, before that time, there's been a big crackdown on gay cruising areas and gay clubs with dark rooms, etc., in Greece, in Athens in particular, and that the whole kind of cruising scene, if you want to call it that, has been driven completely underground, and that's something which therefore makes it far less visible. Yeah, I mean, where they had the sweeps was in major kind of places in town. It's like exactly like Zoe said, like having a sort of sweep at Trafalgar Square, that visibly and that kind of openly. So you wouldn't be able to do that with gay men. You couldn't just go up to up to the Heath and catch them in the act, as it were. It wouldn't happen.
A few more questions up here.
Can I just also say,
sorry.
it is easier to, if you have a target in mind, like sex workers, to land them in the context of a legalised framework like you have in Greece, because there is only a specific, very niche kind of sanctioned sex work, and it can only take place in legal brothels. Well, it does take place in illegal brothels too. And that's what happens when you only permit a very certain kind of sex work. They're easy to find. It's difficult for them to organise. I think that may have also had something to do with the fact that it wasn't men who have sex with men, but these other marginalised groups. On this occasion, they're not organised groups. They're incredibly ostracised. Their activities do take place in very specific locations, and therefore, yeah, they're like sitting ducks. Yeah, go on.
Okay, so firstly, again, thank you so much. And I wanted to ask about the international angle, because I was really struck by the contrast between the UN speech, which I think was earlier, with its kind of rhetoric of false concern about trafficked women forced into having sex, and the way that the same minister spoke to the Greek media, this very vitriolic, this rhetoric of intent. And because this was right around the election, this is when international attention was hugely focused on Greece. But I don't remember hearing anything about this at the time. So was there external involvement? Was there any kind of, either on a European or further afield level, international health organisations, did they have anything to say? Was anyone looking at all? Was it presented differently?
Yeah, thank you for this question. It's important. There was condemnation after the arrest of some media coverage, and I think The Guardian and the Irish Times or something like that, just The Independent. And very little. I mean, it wasn't really extensive, the coverage. I think that it's probably because the coverage of Greece focuses mainly on financial issues, or if there's riots, even better, but not really on. And that's probably not fair. I mean, there are always the sad sob stories about the people who've lost their jobs and things like that. But I mean, this is kind of a very rough subject to talk about, and the images also were very, I guess, not very disturbing, but in a different way, different from riots and these kinds of things. But also, in terms of the condemnation, yes, it came from the major organizations, UNAIDS, Human Rights Watch, and some, well, not just UNAIDS, but also some major organizations like Human Rights Watch, and some sex workers groups and transgender groups in Europe and other countries. But the big story here is also that the health decree that enabled these arrests, which was it's a terrible text that is, it's unbelievable that something like this has been signed. The minister signed it by himself at the end of, beginning of April, a few weeks before the arrests. And it was based on a health decree from the 1940s that was basically about the sanitation of buildings, restaurants, and he just threw these vulnerable groups into the mix as potential hazards, posing a hazard to public health. And that health decree was reinstated this past summer. So a year later, it was repealed, end of May, beginning of June, this past June, after extensive, advocacy from the HIV organizations and groups in Greece advocating human rights, different groups, and it was repealed. But a new health minister, far-right minister called Avanos Georgiadis, we might as well name one, reinstated a few hours after he was sworn in as health minister, and that's when I personally feel that's when there was more intense international reaction from UNAIDS, from Beret Sinousi, from for Human Rights Watch, and obviously I know from people I speak to that in internal sort of circles, and also at UNAIDS and the European Commission, the ECDC, the European Centre for Disease Control. I mean, there is very strong discontent about this issue. It's just something that makes everybody very uncomfortable. And when the ECDC visited Greece after the arrest, they held they did a research on HIV, prevalence of HIV in Greece, and they published a report in November 2012, which is online, you can look at it, which contradicts everything that the ministers have said here regarding migrants and whether they drive HIV infections. They don't. They didn't back then, and they still don't. Whether you can make the argument that sex workers are driving the infections, there was no data. And also whether females are driving the infections as opposed to men. Again, not the case. Whether it was generally or within subgroups, like injecting drug users, etc. So I don't know what that says. For me personally, I feel very frustrated about the coverage of Greece abroad. It's a very frustrating thing to me. I mean, there's a low attention span. There's a tendency to just, I don't know, just generalize and find a reason to just divert attention from the political problems and how these have translated into society, and zero understanding about social movements. There's this generalizing about radicalism in Greece, left versus, the Golden Dawn, etc. And you saw it in this case that it's difficult to grasp what happened here. If you try to, you see that the problems are not financial, really. They're not. I mean, they are, but that's not, I mean, that shouldn't just be your focus when you're covering Greece. It's an ailing society that has tremendous problems, and the people whom you have assigned with fixing the financial issues are actually racists. All of them. And they're not going to, and the media too. I mean, just looking at the way they're talking about human biology, that reflects the way they've talked about the debt and the deficit. They're just incompetent. And I think that's a very uncomfortable truth for a lot of people outside of Greece to talk about, given that they support the Troika and, you know, the austerity measures and going on right now.
I just wanted to add to this that it brought to mind a recent. I was reading recently in the Financial Times something about how the Troika representatives were or have been throughout, you know, for years now, sort of taken aback by how much the Greek politicians don't care about the future of Greece, but care about their own future re-election, which sounds like a cliche, and it sounds like a sort of, you know, and it also sounds like a Greek kind of exceptionalism. That's only Greece has this kind of own sort of pocket money, bat yourself in the back kind of attitude, which is really that really grates. In the sense that kind of, as we saw in the film, the idea that you can actually manipulate police, media, public opinion to the detriment of lives and bodies of these women, and in order to gain, sort of, to become that kind of proto-Hitlery, sort of fascist, popular politician, I simply do not see that is a particularly Greek problem. And you're right in saying that, you know, all the people that are in power or whatever have the tendency to be like that. Whether that's an issue that's been imposed on Greece, or imposed on Greece, or is kind of, you know, born out of Greece, I don't know. But the idea that Greece is an exception to the political kind of firmament, to me, is a complete nonsense that people have been using quite a lot, and that it acts as a sort of mask or a veil to cover up the fact that whatever is wrong in Greece, such as the rise of the Golden Dawn, is precisely the sort of thing that if it's not, that could be wrong in Italy, Portugal, Spain, France, Germany, and could well be wrong, you know, the UK in years' time. That's for me is evident.
I would like to add that just a couple of weeks ago in Scotland, we've seen a continuation of laws that have previously been used to penalise sex working women and clients of sex workers, i.e. possession of condoms used as evidence in venues for sex work. Those laws have been attempted to be brought into place in non-commercial saunas, that is to say, venues where men have sex with men, and they had their condoms taken away from them. So you can see where that ends up, you know, taking condoms away from men who want to have consensual sex with each other. It's a slippery, or not so slippery.
We have time for one more question, and I think maybe two quick ones, but I apologize if I don't get to all of you. Yeah.
I just wanted to agree on the point of Greece not being an exception, because I think we've seen that the use of a mythology to justify something that has almost nothing to do with the justification that's presented in the press and by politicians. And in the UK, we had a few years ago, we had the anti-trafficking operation, and I think the anti-trafficking discourse is employed globally, or is deployed globally, as a way to control immigration and as a way of enacting various kinds of racism across the world, but particularly in the UK. Operation Pentameter arrested something like over 500 people, and I think almost half of them were subsequently deported, and many of those people were women. And in that case, they were sex workers, but it didn't matter that they were sex workers. That wasn't why they were targeted. It was totally, you know, coincidental. It's useful that that's a marginalized group. It's useful to target people who are isolated and marginalized. But the real purpose there was to deport people and to control immigration by finding people who were easily, who were easy targets basically, and in physical places where they could be located. And a lot of things that have been brought in, which fit into that sort of discourse and that mythology, have then been used since then to control immigration, in theory, but it is very much motivated by something entirely different. And I think what the film indicates and what things such as Pentameter 2 indicate is the importance of looking at the effects of what's actually happening to marginalized groups and trying to hear what they're saying about what's happening to them, because we can't trust what we're hearing in the news and we can't trust the justifications that we hear from politicians. And if we don't have access to the voices of marginalized groups across society, drug users, sex workers, trans people, all kinds of different groups, then we don't actually really know what's happening to them a lot of the time, and that's quite scary, I think, as we've seen tonight.
Yeah.
Zoe, what was the reaction in Greece, outside Athens?
Surprisingly, very, very strong. I mean, we had full houses in Rhodos and Rhodes and Kavala, and some of the venues were actually large venues, like the local municipal theaters, and in Yanina, in Patras, where I had a chance to go, Thessaloniki, also at the Aristotelian University, big crowds in Athens. We had smaller screenings in other towns as well, and I think Greece there are a lot of conservative elements in Greek society, not just within the usual suspects where you'd expect to find them, but also in terms of gender relations, even among anarchists and people in the left. So my hope was that even without, I'm not sure if you can never gauge the reaction, or people can be immediately, able to articulate what their thoughts are about a film. But I hope that it's made people realize, and Greece has helped people realize, that all these issues that we tend to sort of push to the side for the weirdos to deal with in times of peace and prosperity, or whatever, the weirdos being, a derogatory term that I probably shouldn't have used just now, but meaning people who are in these marginalized groups, or people who are interested in subjects like, that make the gender studies departments of the world, that these issues are actually the issues that are at the heart of all the other major issues. We can't talk about the economy or the political crisis in Greece without talking about our bodies, issues of agency, the relationships between men and women. I mean, I hope that in order to understand the way power works on a state level, we need to understand the way it works on a personal level, and within our families, our communities, and also in our personal relationships. And unless we challenge these very old notions of gender and power, and I don't think we're never going to be ready for social change. And we're never going to be able to drive any sort of major, even to build solidarity networks and solidarity relationships between each other. There's all these lines, or like one of the parties in government said, the red lines. I think that there's lines are constantly drawn between social groups, between people in the workforce, in the workplace, in our personal relationships. And those serve to separate us from the person sitting next to us who has the same problem. Because I don't think there's a single person in Greece who is not a vulnerable person right now. There's an aggressive dismantling of the health sector, and people are going to die. That's the natural course of things. You don't prevent disease, you don't provide medication. We had in Greece cases of people going to hospitals to take an HIV test where they were made to sign a disclosure that they knew that they might be receiving blood that had not been tested. This actually happened in the past year because the hospitals had not the proper equipment to do that for a short span of time. These are the kinds of things that are happening, and for those things we're going to pay a price in human life. So to talk about HIV in terms of gay men or sex workers or drug users is a moot point. It's moot. I mean, we don't have the luxury to do that. And we understand now, and we see that we are being sacrificed as people. We're not making sacrifices like that's the austerity sort of dictum, I'm not making a sacrifice. I am the sacrifice. We're becoming the sacrifice. People are being sacrificed here. So the sooner we understand that it's not about sexual preference or, a way of life or these notions of morality, what is happening to us, and that we're in this together, the better, the more, ready we will be to deal with these issues,
Thank you. I think we should probably wrap it up. Zoe, do you have some final words at all about the project or about the future of?
Well, no, I just wanted to thank you, Michael Muir, for organizing this, and Hector and Tanya for being here, and just wanted to thank you for screening the film, because when we made it, we weren't hoping for any screenings, really. We didn't know what was going to happen, so it's good to be here.
Well, we thank you. I thank you, Toni Mack and Hector Kollias, and of course Zoe Mavroudi, for your fascinating, troubling, disturbing documentary that hopefully will have people talking about what is happening in Greece and in Europe and in the world.
Oh yeah, I do want to say something.
Yes.
Sorry, we have a website, it's ruins-documentary.com. We're going to be releasing the documentary at some point online. And, just wanted to let people know that we're going to be doing that, hopefully soon.
Okay, and thank you for coming. So.